going on, guys? Coming back with another video for the weekend. I want you guys to pay attention to this one. I'm going to try to go into a lot more detail in terms of where my head's at going into Q4. I appreciate the feedback on the last video I did. I'm going to try to do at least one a week. In the last video, we talked about how Bitcoin was at really a critical point around 112. I think we have to go back here and talk about what happened earlier this week because it's important for the context of what's coming. So if we zoom in here, you had a bunch of moving averages right around this 114 level. And there's a reason why I actually show you guys these moving averages. Notice how they're all compressed together. When you start to get moving averages like this, all sort of like in the same spot, that usually coincides with a volatility move in a particular direction. You can see that you had that right here. You can see that you had that right here. And pretty much every big crypto move, you get this sort of event. And this is the 20-day, the 50-day, the 100-day. Sometimes you even have the 200-day, pretty close, like you had back in October of last year, November of last year. But that's also after you have a super big range where you'll get that sort of situation. So no surprise that hasn't quite happened here. But that doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. That's one way of knowing that you're compressed. Now, there's all these other more sophisticated ways. If you look at Bitcoin volatility, it's at all-time lows, and it's not going to stay there forever, right? You're only going to be compressed going sideways for so long. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is that when you lose an important level, you can assume that it's going to move pretty hard. And that's what it's done so far when it lost this level right here, like instantly down, like 3.5%, something like that. There's consequences to losing a level like this. Now, while I'm still bullish going into Q4, I also realize that the bears are in control of this market right now. When you lost this higher low right here, which would have been a pretty clean structure had it held this level right here, there's consequences to that, and that many people will now start to sell because their thesis is invalidated from a technical standpoint. We've lost all of our major moving averages, 20, 50, 100. Only thing we have left is the 200. So naturally, people are going to expect us to go test this level, which you're seeing this a lot in the timeline. It's about 105. I'm sure you're seeing that a lot. And you'll see that there's a lot of confluence with that level in other respects. We can see from a volume standpoint, you have a nice little volume shelf there. From a monthly standpoint, so we know monthly closes are very important because they really show you what larger participants are doing. There's a reason why you have these closes like this back to back. This was an important level for larger players. And we can see that you had some monthly open and close activity around 104, but really it's this 102 level that I think is probably more important. This was like really your line in the sand point in the previous range we had here, but anywhere from like 104, 105 down to that level should be a target for people if they're bearish. Now, we know how this plays out. If everybody wants this level here, it's either going to blow right through it or it's going to get there and immediately come back up. Like, it's not going to get there, in my opinion, and just sit there, barring some pretty bad news. Why? Because everybody wants it. Now, how ridiculous, or a better way to put it is this move down to that point even out of the ordinary, you may ask? And the answer is no. So if we look at Bitcoin right now from the Pico top here, it's only down like 12%. If you were to go to 102, you're down 17, 18%. Okay, to put that in perspective, last summer, you had multiple 20% moves to the downside. right? And the summer before that, same sort of situation. So 20% is pretty normal. I know it's matured and maybe we shouldn't expect that, but I mean, it is pretty normal if from a historical context. Now, another thing I want to mention though, is it is going to be difficult, I think, for this to really get further down than, let's say, 100. The reason why is what we talked about in the last video. A lot of funds didn't buy a lot of assets like they should have this year. And it's going to naturally, I think, people are going to naturally see Bitcoin as a catch-up trade. Now, obviously, its structure looks a little bit ugly here. But let's say that this were to, break down here and start showing some constructive price action. That's going to be a good looking chart for people to get involved in. And I think it could play out something like that. I'm not one of these people who are trying to time it out perfectly and everything. I'm just going to tell you that in the very short term, like as in the next few weeks, it's not very likely that it's going to want to hold here very easily. Now, here's the reality though. It could hold here. And I could be laughing about making this video even talking about these targets. But I'm just being realistic in the sense that like momentum is to the downside, and it is sort of more likely than not that it will try. Doesn't mean that it will. Maybe it holds this level here. Either way, as you know, I am bullish. So whether we bottom at 110, 105, 102, or maybe in a worst case, or I should say more left tail case or more unexpected bad news case, something like 90, lower 90s, 95 or something like this, right? Around this volume shelf right here. Like I could see that happening, and there's a CME gap here as well. I could see something like this happening if we have some really bad news. Or just, big TradFi drawdown where S&P is down, headed 5% plus, closer to 10% downside. I could see something like that. So what do you do about this, right? Like, well, it depends on what your goal is. Like if you're a professional trader, you were definitely going to cut on that 112 loss. Like I said, that was my line in the sand. You have to have some line in the sand if you're using leverage, if you're actually sizing up on these things. And I think if you're a professional trader, you're just waiting to see what happens. Does it hold here? Does it, what does it look like when it gets here? But you are really going to react versus predict. If you remember anything in this video, reacting versus predicting, now that we've lost the cleaner structure, is pretty important. I was willing to predict, try to get ahead of something when we were holding 112, but I'm not now that is lost. Does that mean that I'm bearish, higher time frame? No. It's just at some point you have to be practical and look at this thing as a long game, not a short game. Okay, protecting profits is important. Okay, so altcoins are going to be really interesting in this scenario because ultimately they're going to depend on what Bitcoin does. And if you look at ETH here, I find this to be a very interesting setup in that clearly this is the clear setup that I think that most people are eyeing, right? It's this higher low, really on this previous high range high. And it has held that so far, predictably. But if Bitcoin were to drop lower, you know that this is likely going to try to retest this again. And it's pretty critical that it would hold, I would say, around 3,800. Because if it didn't, I mean, there is just a lot of room between here and its 200-day moving average. Now, my base case is you're not going there. Okay. Sorry. Base case is you're not going to this 200-day moving average, which is around 3,000. But if Bitcoin were to really have a problem, you would go there. Like if Bitcoin's headed below 100K, you're probably going to break this level and you're going to probably go here. Just throwing that out there. I hope it doesn't happen. But you got to be prepared for it. Bitcoin's got to hold like 105, 102-ish, I think, for this to hold. I'm optimistic that will occur because this is a pretty darn clean setup. If this thing is like basing out around here going into latter part of the year, that would look really nice. And I don't know how long this takes. I'm not concerned about that. but I do think it will hold. And I do think we will see 5K at the latest early next year. I do not think it's going to sit around here very long. Okay, let's talk about some of these other altcoins. So this is the runner right now. And if you're in the group chats with me, you know I've been pretty bullish on this one. A lot of people just did not, this totally just took them off guard here, or caught them off guard, in the sense that they were not expecting this to be such a ripper. A lot of times you get these token launches and they actually dump. This one was different in that it was actually pretty fairly valued at launch, and you had some big buyers that stepped in. On Friday, you had some people exiting, that may have been long down here or got the airdrop or selling some of their profits to some extent. But as you're seeing, it's holding, and this is a pretty strong chart. Any dip on here, I'm trying to buy at least until $2. I'm not saying it gets there easily, but stablecoin narrative, come on, guys, there is almost no way to invest in this in an obvious way from a crypto native standpoint. TRX was almost the most obvious way you would do that, or Aave or something like that. Some application that has stablecoins, but a stablecoin chain like Plasma is the most clear expression of this view that stablecoins are going to be, a huge narrative going forward. So I like this. I think it may take some time, as it goes higher, but this is something you want to be part of and not fade. Okay, at least now. Pump is another one that I'm already trying to catch a knife on this one, and I'm willing to step in here, and I'm going to tell you why. Pump is down about 40% from the highs. So if I take this as roughly the high, you're down about 40%. That's all I need to, I am not picky on the altcoins when they're down 40 and 50%. I'm in. I'm not going to wait for some, perfect pattern or something here. I don't care if Bitcoin dips more. It's down 40%. Now, does that mean I'm all in on it? No. But I've had a lot more luck with altcoins not being picky after they're down 40, 50%. Particularly going into October and November, where we know the chances for these things going up are actually quite good. So I like this. I don't know where it goes, but just a mean reversion trade on this one. Let's just say 50% mean reversion from here is 30%. So I really like this. I'd probably trim some off at that point, but I like this going forward into October and November. There's some other ones that I'd also like. But those are the two that I really like. I know a lot of people like ASTER, so we'll actually look at this a little closer. This is not a bad chart either, obviously. Now, how much it has left in the tank is to be determined, right? I could see this continue to be a runner. The main thing is you don't want to get in front of this shorting it. Right? It doesn't have any structure to warrant that. Obviously, people are just buying these dips. It still looks good. So this is something that I'll be trading intraday, but I am not holding this with a big position. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. I'm more interested in this from a little shorter time frame. Whereas some of these other things like hype, maybe I would actually hold for a bigger trade. This is a freaking very nice response here on hype. So what I like, as you can see, is XBL, ASTER, hype, pump. These are the coins I think that are going to do a lot better than most in Q3, Q4. And a lot of these have in common is these are money makers. I know XBL is to be determined in terms of profitability, but we know ASTER, hype, pump. These protocols make money, right? These are legitimate money making protocols, and those are the kinds of things I think that will get people excited when we do start to get these ETP listings for different crypto assets. I think that's pretty much all I'm going to cover. I think you kind of get the gist. Still bullish. we may have a little bit further downside, but they are buying opportunities. And whether or not Bitcoin goes, bottoms at 105, 102, 100, or even 95-ish is going to determine a lot about the macro or not the macro, but the narratives. Are people afraid because of some event that happened? Is it Russia, U.S. drama? Things like this. And obviously, with the S&P going risk off, correlations oftentimes go to 1. But regardless, in almost all these circumstances or on all these paths, I like Bitcoin higher in a fairly short period of time over the next few months. Okay, guys, I think that's all I'm going to cover today. Until next time, happy weekend.